The worst nuclear disaster to strike Japan since a single bomb fell over Nagasaki in 1945 occurred in the spring of 2011 at the Fukushima nuclear power plant following the epic tsunami. Just last week, it was reported that radiation readings at the site had reached their highest points to date. The wide release of radiation and fear of same has forced Japanese and others all over the world to reflect on what had happened to the country in 1945 and the continuing but usually submerged threat of nuclear weapons and energy today. Those are the words of Greg Mitchell, co-author of the book Hiroshima in America, A Half-Century of Denial. Mitchell is our guest today. He's also written Atomic Cover-Up, 2 U.S. soldiers, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the greatest movie never made. Yes, today is the 66th anniversary of the U.S. atomic bombing of Nagasaki, which killed some 75,000 people and left another 75,000 seriously wounded. It came just 3 days after the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing around 80,000 people, injuring some 70,000. By official Japanese estimates, nearly 300,000 people died from the bombings, including those who lost their lives in the ensuing months and years from related injuries and illnesses. Other researchers estimate a much higher death toll. The atomic bombings of Japan remain the only time nuclear weapons have been used in war to date. At a ceremony over the weekend, the Japanese Prime Minister Naoto Kan honored the dead from the World War II bombing, adding he deeply regrets having believed the so-called security myth, which suggested Japan could be safely powered by the same atomic forces that instantly killed so many Japanese people over 6 decades ago. Well, today we'll look at the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bombings and their legacy amidst Japan's ongoing nuclear crisis. We turn first to Nagasaki, through the story of the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist George Weller. Weller was the first reporter to enter Nagasaki, defying a U.S. media ban in southern Japan. He worked for the Chicago Daily News, hired a rowboat to get himself to Nagasaki. He wrote a 25,000-word report on the horrors he encountered. When he submitted his story to the military censors, General Douglas MacArthur personally ordered the story killed, and the manuscript was never returned. George Weller later summarized his experience with the government censors, saying, "They won." Well, years ago, George Weller's son, Anthony, discovered a copy of the suppressed dispatches among his late father's papers. George Weller died in 2002. They're now published as a book called First into Nagasaki, the censored eyewitness dispatches on post-atomic Japan and its prisoners of war. This is an excerpt of an interview that Juan Gonzalez and I did with Anthony Weller, George Weller's son, shortly after he first discovered his late father's papers.
Well, I think the thing that astonished him the most, I mean, there were many things that he found astonishing. Remember, he went in there 4 weeks almost to the minute after the bomb was dropped, which was on the 6th of September in mid-morning is when he arrived. And he was struck, obviously, by several things, by the physical appearance of the city, which was still smoldering here and there, by the surgical precision of the bomb itself. Later, he was to learn that, in fact, a great deal of damage had been done, not just by the bomb, but by the fires that erupted, because people were cooking their midday meal when the bomb hit, and a number of wooden residences just caught fire, and the fire spread. So, in a way, it was kind of like a Dresden. And as he went round the ruins of the city and rapidly began visiting all the hospital facilities that still existed, I know he was struck immediately first by the absence of any American medical personnel. 4 weeks later, there were still no doctors or nurses. And then by the great precision and care with which the Japanese doctors had already cataloged the effects of the bomb on individual organs of the body. And over the next few days, he was as astonished as the Japanese doctors were, of course, by what he referred to in his reports as disease X. It was perhaps not so astonishing to see some of the scorches and burns that people had suffered, but to see people apparently unblemished at all by the bomb, who had seemingly survived intact, suddenly finding themselves feeling unwell and going to hospital, sitting there on their cots surrounded by doctors and relatives who could do nothing, and finding when he would go back the next day that they had just died. Or that, let's say, a woman who had come through unscathed, making dinner for her husband and having the misfortune to make a very small cut in her finger while peeling a lemon, would just keep bleeding and bleed to death because the platelets in her bloodstream had been so reduced that the blood couldn't clot anymore. So there were case after case like this, and in a way I think my father found them more poignant than the obvious destruction or the obvious burn victims, because here was a whole team of Japanese doctors, very able, very aware from long before the war had started about the potentials of radiation, absolutely baffled. And he had a wonderful phrase he used. He said the effects of the bomb, uncured because it, or excuse me, the effects of disease X, which is what they were calling it, uncured because it is untreated, and untreated because it is undiagnosed.
Anthony Weller, the son of George Weller, whose story on the Nagasaki bombings was blocked by military censors. As we turn now to an account of the 1945 atomic bombing of Nagasaki by the pilots who flew the B-29 bomber that dropped that bomb. This is an excerpt of the documentary Hiroshima Countdown, produced by Andrew Phillips.
This is one in a series of interviews conducted by the Air Force Historical Division. Today we are interviewing Brigadier General Paul W. Tibbets, Jr., who is retiring.
They were definitely military targets. There was no question about that. And they offered such a, well, you could almost say a classroom experiment as far as being able to determine later the bomb damage. These were good virgin targets, and they were ideal for the purpose that we wanted to use them for.
The consideration of targets would be Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Niigata, Kokura, and there was one more that I don't remember. The 20th Air Force had been told they would not attack those targets under any circumstances. In other words, the ground was laid.
As well as these targets, Kyoto, Japan's ancient capital, was strongly recommended by the man with overall control of the bomb project, General Leslie Groves. But Secretary of War Henry Stimson, approaching 80 years of age, would not have it. He'd visited Kyoto with his wife in the 20s and had enjoyed the city's cultural riches. It was a city of great religious significance to the Japanese, and Stimson felt Kyoto's destruction would damage America's post-war stature.
The selection of the targets in the month of May, 1945, was actually done by the intelligence community in headquarters U.S. Air Force. The requirements given to them was, you will select cities that have military targets in them. And they also selected the type of terrain that they wanted. They also were interested in the type of construction that they could expect to run into. Because in reality, not only was this a military mission, but it was also of extreme scientific importance, because they wanted to know what a weapon of this type could do against reinforced concrete, what it could do against steel, what it would do against anything that was in the building materials line. It had to be something that had not been attacked by the 20th Air Force up to that time. Call it virgin targets, undamaged, unhurt by any other type of an explosive or munition.
I knew the type of bomb we were working on.
Charles Sweeney flew with Tibbets in an observer aircraft to witness the bombing of Hiroshima. 3 days later, he would lead his crew first to Kokura, the primary target for the second bomb, and then to Nagasaki. Kokura was clouded in that day.
As he was talking, he picked up a handful of earth. He said, basically what we're working on is a single bomb that will turn a whole city into this. And he just tossed a handful of sand into the air.
The voices of the men who loaded and flew the B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki, August 9, 1945. From the documentary Hiroshima Countdown, produced by Andrew Phillips. We'll link to the whole documentary at democracynow.org. When we come back from break, we'll speak with a man who has followed this story for decades, the author of Atomic Cover-Up, Greg Mitchell. Stay with us.